Your hypothesis is not just a vibe, and it's definitely not a random guess. It's a testable commitment. If you cannot justify why your variable A affects your variable B, your examiners will never accept your logic. Today we are breaking down the logic of hypothesis formation so your prediction can hold some value. To get this right, we have to align with the Bibles of research, Sakaran, Bougie, and Creswell. Your research question is the what, and your objective is the goal. But your hypothesis is your educated guess based on your theory. Look at how they flow together. You can see that in a research question, we are talking about the relationship. So the tone of this question would be kind of inquiring about something, inquiring about a relationship. For example, does gamification increase student retention? So when we make it to the research objective, so instead of asking question about the relationship, we would like to measure that relationship. So from the inquiry part, now we're going into the action mode. For example, when we're talking about the research question, does gamification increase student retention? We are setting our objective as to evaluate the effect of gamification on student retention. So it has to be a mirror image, as we discussed before in our research question and objective class. So when we make this research question and objective into a hypothesis, we consider the theories we studies, the problem statement, and how theory suggests that hypothesis, which is also related to my research question and objective. So for an example, connecting it with the previous example of research question and objective, now we're saying that gamification has a significant positive effect on student retention. We started with the inquiry, does gamification increase student retention? Then we moved on to the action phase, which is to evaluate the effect of gamification on student retention. Then we went on to do our literature search, literature review. And after that, we are saying gamification has a significant positive effect on student retention. So this is how we move on from the research question to research objective to hypothesis. We can talk about 3 different types of hypotheses that you need to know. The first one is simple, one cause and one effect. One independent variable, which is the cause, it directly affecting one dependent variable, which is the effect. For example, coffee consumption, which is independent variable, increases alertness level, which is dependent variable. In my thesis, if I'm saying that media skepticism negatively influenced brand trust, which means media skepticism is the cause or it's the independent variable and brand trust is the dependent variable. So the relationship between this is one cause and one effect. Media skepticism has negative effects on brand trust. When we make it a little complex, I'm going to show you some examples later as well. When we make it complex, we make multiple variables interacting. So there could be multiple independent variables or depending variables, or there could be mediating or moderating variables. For example, gamification affects engagement, which mediates its effect on learning outcome. In my thesis, brand trust was actually the mediating variable. So it mediated the relationship between media skepticism and news media dependency. Then there is the villain, the party pooper, which is null hypothesis. Null hypothesis states that nothing is happening, no relationship, no difference, no effect. For example, there is no significant relationship between media skepticism and brand trust. If we're saying that, we're saying this is a null hypothesis, there is no relationship. And in any research, at first, we try to reject the null hypothesis with our data. Rejecting proves that our original prediction, which was media skepticism and brand trust has significant relationship, that if that was our main prediction, we want to reject the null hypothesis first with evidence And that's the only way we can prove that our prediction or our hypothesis is proven or correct. Let's talk about null hypothesis a bit more. This is like the boring status quo or the current state of relationships. So we have to talk about it, as I mentioned, that you have to reject the null hypothesis first. So it assumes that there is absolutely no relationship between your variables. In your PhD, you're the prosecutor. You gather enough statistical evidence to reject the null hypothesis so your actual prediction can stand. If you cannot defeat the null hypothesis, your study stays in no results zone. Then you have the alternative hypothesis. So any other hypothesis that we actually predict in our thesis is alternative hypothesis. We write null hypothesis as H0. You can see the no relationship exists. Then we go to H1, H2, H3. So any H1, H2, H3 of our hypotheses are alternative hypotheses. These are our hero. So it is the actual prediction we want to support. You aren't trying to prove the alternative is true. So you're trying to show the null hypothesis is so unlikely that the alternative is the only logical conclusion left standing. Now, how do you phrase that alternative hypothesis? A non-directional version or a directional version? A non-directional version is safe. It just says there is a relationship, but a directional version is the pro move. If your theory says media skepticism makes people depend on news more, pick that side. Don't just repeat the question, make a claim. Confident scholars pick a specific path. To explain this transition from safe to pro, we need to look at the statistical risk and the theoretical depth you're taking on. When you move from a non-directional to a directional hypothesis, you're essentially moving from a detective role to a strategist role. A non-directional hypothesis is like being a detective. You walk into a room, you see a mess, and say, I am certain something happened here. Something happened between these variables, or something is happening between these variables. So I don't know the outcome yet. You're looking for any evidence of a relationship, but you aren't committing to what it looks like yet. It could be a positive relationship, it could be a negative relationship. So when we're saying there is a like for an example, there is a significant relationship between media skepticism and brand trust. We just want to say there is a relationship, but if we go and check the previous literature about media skepticism and its relationship with brand trust, some might suggest that media skepticism increase or decrease the brand trust. So if we back with those literature, our study is more specific and evidence-based and backed by previous literature. A directional hypothesis is like being a strategist. You look at the situation and boldly predict exactly what will happen. If I do X, then Y will definitely go up. You aren't just looking for a clue, you're betting on a specific outcome based on the theory you have studied. So, why this matter for your PhD? If you play the detective role, which is non-directional, you play it safe. If the result goes up or down, you're still right. You still have data to prove. It's good for brand new topics where no one knows what to expect. And if you want to go for directional route, which is being the strategist, you take a risk. You say, my theory says this will be a positive relationship. It looks much more impressive to examiners because it shows you actually understand the why behind your research. Let's do a quick vibe check. Are you currently playing a detective and hoping to find any relationship? Or are you ready to be a strategist and call your shot? Type your independent and dependent variable in the comments below. I want to see if you can turn your maybe into definitely. If we give more example for directional and non-directional hypothesis, for non-directional hypothesis, think of this as the curious observer approach. You're telling your examiners, I'm sure something is happening between these two variables, but I'm not willing to bet on the outcome yet. So Why are you saying that? Because you're looking for a relationship in both direction. You would be satisfied if the result shows that variable A increases variable B, or if variable A decreases variable B. As we already mentioned, there is a significant relationship between media skepticism and news dependency. Use this when your field is brand new or when previous studies are fighting. For example, if 3 authors say it's a positive relationship and 3 others say it's a negative relationship, you're staying neutral to avoid being wrong. For directional hypothesis, this is the confidence scholar approach. You aren't just saying they're related, you're predicting the nature of the relationship. You're looking for a result in one specific direction only. If you predict a positive relationship, but the data shows a negative one, your hypothesis is technically rejected, even though a relationship exists. Media skepticism has a significant positive effect on news dependency, or a higher levels of skepticism lead to higher levels of dependency. This is an example. This is where your literature synthesis from episode 13 pays off. If the media system dependency says that ambiguity leads to dependency, then you have the academic permission to be directional. And why directional is the pro move? Because first reason is statistical power. Mathematically, a directional or one-tailed test is often easier to pass because you're putting all your statistical significance into one side of the curve. However, it's riskier because if the effect goes to the opposite way, you get nothing. And also, examiners love direction. It shows you haven't just read the abstracts, you have understood the mechanisms of the theory. It proves you have a clear mental model of how the world works. Then a directional hypothesis tells you exactly what kind of analysis you need to run. It makes the transition to your action phase, which is methodology section, much smoother. Sometimes the relationship isn't direct. A moderator is like a dimmer switch. It changes the strength of the relationship based on a condition like age, gender, or maybe some social class. For example, gamification might work better for millennials than for Gen X. But the real PhD level move is the mediator. This is your bridge. It explains the process of how things happen. Before you write down your hypothesis, remember these 3 rules. First, it must be testable. You need a scale, not just a feeling. Second, it must be grounded in theory. You say it because the theory suggests it. And then the third is know your actors. Identify your independent variable as the cause and your dependent variable as the effect. So if we combine all of them, why do we choose null hypothesis? And when to use it? You always have to use a null hypothesis because this is your baseline that you defeat, you must defeat. You always reject your null hypothesis to prove your alternative hypothesis. Alternative hypothesis is your actual research predictions. This is the core contributions of your study. When do you want to select a moderating variable? When you want to explain the condition. It shows that you understand your context, like some relationship might be higher or lower when there is variable of age or gender or social class or maybe level of experience. Any of this moderating variable is present in your study in that relationship. So it can make the relationship stronger or weaker. It can change the direction of the hypothesis. For mediating variable you need mediating variable to explain the process. This is the gold standard for PhD. You now have the bricks for your research logic. Now that you know how to predict the path between your variables, we need to build the blueprint. In the final video of Chapter 2, Literature Review, we are going to build the GPS. We are melting your theory and your hypothesis into a single conceptual framework. I'll see you there.